Okay. Hello, everyone. Um, is it? Yeah. Okay. Hello, everyone. This is the part two to the inner flight of the plane of existence. I remember the last thing I was saying before I um, had to cut off um, was that really in society we have something called Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and ultimately there is at the top of the pyramid self actualization. There we go. So you see that it's as if human beings have a sort of, as Maslow's hierarchy of needs would suggest, you have a physiological need, your physical survival. It's important to maintain, you know, your food, your sleeping, your individual life. The second thing is we require safety. It's as if after you are a functioning creature, the next thing to secure is the space of your function, the freedom of your own space of intelligence. So safety comes in. And then we have beyond that love and belonging, as Maslow says. So we went from the bottom of the pyramid, from physiological needs to safety, and then to love and being, and it's becoming more psychological as we go up. And so, what that means is imagine you're a human being who has found a way to satisfy your basic needs, and that means you have no problem with food, shelter. Um, you have no problem with food, maintenance of your individual life. You have no problem with the kind of shelter sort of establishment of ensuring your continuity. And then there is, after we have maintained the physical relationships of the mind, I find that from when it comes to love and belonging, then that's when a sort of subjective realm of the individual is being seeking satisfaction. So what happens after I have conquered the objective realm? Well, guess what? The mind is still alone. Does it matter if you stand alone on the top of a mountain or the bottom of the mountain? Either way, you're alone. So you see, we seek love and belonging, and in some sense, to become part of the social fabric. I currently see civilization doesn't have a good story. Children are not waking up being super stoked about kind of contributing to the advancement of their civilization. They're waking up and they're like, okay, another day to do stuff, like. But the ultimate motivation for the recognition that self-actualization is actually the actualization of your world. That means when you identify as a member of the human species, so you're ultimately identifying with all human beings. And because you're identifying with all human beings, the outcome of humanity is part of one's individual psychology. That means the concept or the idea that we cannot really separate the individual from the collective. They are codependent, they are defined by one another. So we go up and we see the next one is esteem. It's like you don't just need to be loved, you don't need to just have companionship, but you also need to be acknowledged for your worth. So you can say the lower levels of Maslow's hierarchy of needs are the maintenance of your value, and when it goes above to esteem and self-actualization, this means that the individual, after being able to maintain itself to be present in the collective, now begins having a relationship with the collective. And one of your early relationships with human beings is, believe it or not, your lovers in this life. All those people you come to some degree begin to realize that without them, life's fulfillment is less. Ultimately, it does come down to perspectives, though. That means there are human beings who their psychology is kind of like, what's the term? And Andrew, it's like they are not inclined to either side. So it's as if the person is doesn't identify with one side of the polarity and doesn't identify with the other side of the polarity, and in some sense is a relationship of the ebbs and flows of the cycles of living. So ultimately, you after you have love and belonging, you seek acknowledgement. Now, after you have acknowledgement, you have actualized the vision of the self to some degree. That means I remember before giving these talks, I had not actualized Mr. Within, literally, the ideal Mr. Within. It was like I had the name on the SoundCloud page years before I started the YouTube page. So it was only when I began to adopt, I began to see not as self I can be, but it was as if in life, to be honest, outside of personal preference, a lot of things are just opportunities. A lot of things, you know. And wisdom commands stepping out of your own eyes to see the other, to see the sight of others. There's joy in that too. There's a joy to waking up one day and realizing every mind is like an incredible plant in the garden. And not all plants are destined to be the same. Not all phenomenology has the same value. And of course, existentially, we may think, oh man, this is all just the hallucination of electrons. This is just a purely atomic reality. But on some level, how the atom is even in place, how the atom is kept, is a subjective unknown process. That means the fact that I look at an object and that object means something to me, like for example, I'm looking in front of me and this object has become a cup. How is this suddenly a cup? It is because the subjective realm authorized itself to imprint upon the objectivity, which means ultimately that we are never objects. We are the subjective experience through various objective states. But ultimately, who is looking out through the eyes? Can you really define it by your memory when you can have memories? So it's like in this moment when I tell you, remember like what happened to you 10 years ago. And imagine if I say, remember what happened to you yesterday, right? So you see, these are memories. These are, you have an ability to not just be locked down in one landscape of reality's laws. That's the cool thing about human life, that we could question. For example, you see a lion. Do you see a lion kind of finding a candle at midnight and setting up a table and writing an essay on its inner realms? No, it's the human being that has done that. The midnight oil has burnt, and in its burning, humanity, many human beings had concluded that their inner realm's continuity was more than their outer realm. And of course, there is always an opportunity cost. Those who live for the world, if you're living for a cause outside of yourself, you will actually feel your individuality is an effect of the collective structure. If you live for a cause within yourself, if you just live for yourself, your collectivity is in some sense a sense of how the individual came into form. What I'm saying is that we are human beings, we are designed creatures. Ultimately, our philosophical speculation of where we are occurs between 0 and 1. So believe it or not, this is going to sound hilarious, but I personally can classify all ideologies ever in human existence by the numbers 0, 1, 2, and instead of 3, I'm going to say infinity. Let's assume that's a number, an infinite number. What does that mean? That means the relationship of our psychology existentially is between nothing and everything. That means when it comes to existence, you go home, go big or go home. When it comes to existential values, the effort is crucial, the precision of the attempt of the instant action is crucial. And so physicality's program is one we must follow. But when it comes to the program of subjectivity, that's where I'm saying, yo, human beings, you got freedom. And human beings are like, what do you mean, Mr. Within? How do I have freedom? And I'm like, you have freedom to interpret your choice. So, anyways, This self-actualization that I've brought up from Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I ultimately, as I mentioned before, feel that the self is codependent with the concepts of the collective. So ultimately, we will not feel self-actualized until the collective is actualized. The collective's actuality is actually kind of strange. Our evolution is so gradual that sometimes in our temporary kind of conscious lifetime, we may not even perceive the changes. There's so many things that the person does, and literally their karma has gone into the hidden, has gone into the unconscious. It's as if you do something, you make a mistake, and nobody figures out what happened. What happened to the karma of that action? That karma of action was somehow administered by the unconscious. Now, I don't want to bring in too much discussion about karma, because ultimately we'll be caught into a cause and effect dynamic where if the cause is objective, the effect is going to feel subjective. If the cause is subjective, the effect is going to feel objective. So what that means is pretty much that you can say all the psychology of all human beings will confront that there's at least zero and one, nothing and everything, nothing and the singular. Oh, okay, nice. Somebody's in the comment section. So, Nikolai Night Vision, welcome to the chat, man. Just seeing your messages. Just give me a second. Going inwards gives you your own affection. You have a sore throat. I have a natural remedy. Yeah, man. That's incredible. I'm gonna actually follow this natural remedy. Wow, that's awesome. So, Nikolai, thanks for sharing that, man. That's definitely I should try it. Yeah, sometimes I've had moments where I've apologized. This is going to sound a bit hilarious, but the archetype of my moment has apologized to my objective being. That means it's like, even though I'm telling people, hey guys, we have an objective component to our moment, a subjective component to our moment, an objective self, a subjective self, an objective realm, a subjective realm. Fascinating. It's I'll be honest, there's been times that the only thing of course, somebody close to me once said, live a life with no regrets. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, I should forget the concept of regret? And really, there are moments you cannot avoid it. You cannot go to a battle of your own experience and not choose to see the scars left behind it. Every day I live, there is a resculpting of my whole psyche. It's as if the attention has stretched out its limbs differently. So, anyways, the reason I was saying that I've had certain moments where I've apologized to my objective being is because you see, the mind is very playful. The mind is so incredibly advanced that it can choose to make anything animate in the subjective realm. That means I could look at any object and playfully I could consider any sort of rhythm of language behind my eyes as a voice to this object. To be honest, it's kind of like, really, it was unavoidable, I think, religion. I think it was unavoidable. Let me tell you why. Because man's understanding of the person came with a relationship of understanding how others are like people. So imagine the psychology of a creature that is looking at the world through itself. So it's comparing everything to itself. So if we think we're a person, it's not too far that some person may look at the cosmos and be like, yo, what if the whole cosmos was a person? So it's like, through our personalized experience comes forth the impersonal existence, or how we choose to weave it, at least with our attention. I've had moments in this life where I felt I had failed before I was born. And I've had moments where I felt I had succeeded before I was born. I felt like whatever I do, I could not fail. And so ultimately, my inner realms played along. I entertained them as myself. I remember, I trust me, it's like every person I feel on this planet gets angry, but their anger either internally expresses or externally, you know? And of course, it is the wisdom of the civilization that if you're a person who gets angry, not to deviate away from your authenticity. I mean, like if you're authentically angry, express it. But I'm saying, if you can handle a condition in your inner realms, it is better than handling it in your outer realms. Because me thinking about an explosion of a rocket is very different in consequence than an actual explosion of a rocket occurring outside. Do you know, it's as if the debris of the rocket doesn't break anything when I'm thinking about it only. Do you know, it doesn't break the other thoughts. There's a sort of unconditional freedom to review and be aware of our conditions. That means I find a way we can define consciousness is the ability to be aware, an unconditional awareness to conditions. It's like, who is the person? It's like the person looks in the mirror. It's like, whoa, my body's been changing since my childhood. My ideologies have been changing. I literally don't even speak the same, or there's many things that have changed. You know, and then suddenly the person realizes, but how can I say who I see in the mirror now compared to 10 years ago is still me? When the biology has changed, when the subjectivity has changed. Guys, Nikolai has just said something very nice in the chat section. He says, regretting the past is double suffering and manifest that regret again. Yeah, if your attention is in one room, it may feel it can never be out in any other room. Ultimately, guys, I can vocalize my sight. And of course, language has limits, but some people discover the poet's infinite curve. Reality in your subjective realms is way more malleable than reality in your objective realms. The point of objectivity is like the static dimensions of life. You require something to compare to something else to even consider imagination. So it brings up this argument that if there was no reality, would there still be imagination? You know, so this is where Rene Descartes' mind body dualism becomes very interesting, because that means if there was no body, would the mind still remain? You know, or is the mind conditional to the body? We as animate human beings, well, of course, without our body, there is no individuality. You know, so our body becomes the center of gravity to many of our perspectives on life. They tend to revolve. That means I'm saying this seriously, guys. Like if you are sitting uncomfortably, your inclination towards your beliefs is different. If you go ask a tired person something at the end of the day, they are way more agreeable than someone early in the morning. Do you know? And so, really, we have to consider the opportunities that the personal, the inner realms provide, and the opportunities the outer realm provides. Now, I noticed that civilization is there's something unique happening. Is that we are we are kind of what can I say? Sight enters the world only to realize it has been it from the start. I have looked for the mind only to see experience and existence laugh at the same thing. The winds of time push every changing moment. For me, it was incredible poetic imagery because in my youth, I was afraid of internal or chaos. That's pretty much any child who's raised with a sort of strict discipline. They feel if they deviate from what is accepted, they will not be accepted. And so this is why you see, how was it? Alan Watts said something hilarious. He said, schools are like the lowest common public schools are like is like the lowest common denominator. All psychologies are welcomed, and it's a situation, any space that you travel from. Like imagine right now if um, like I'm thinking, like if I had another house, and this house got destroyed, I would feel less. I guess I would kind of feel less uh, lost. I'm just simply noticing this, guys. We're 8 billion creatures on a rock. We have developed a technology called language, and this technology has been in a sort of state where before the internet, there was a huge separation. People's inner realms were mysterious. That means before the technological revolution, the mystery of the world remained more in the world. And as technology progressed, the mysteries of the world transformed as the narratives and the cultural programs of human beings transformed. And as we have become more globalized, that means if nations were kids in a classroom, they have begun talking to one another. And these kids in the classroom, as they have begun talking to one another, their ideological perspectives are infused. That means you can say that by hearing one person speak in another part of the world, you have suddenly found access to a sort of influence of a cultural program on a human. It's kind of like when I say programs, there are certain conditions in life that define you. And there are certain conditions in life where you define. The ones that you define, you can attain a sort of unconditional observance beyond, but those that are just conditional, that means like I can't like it's strange. It's like what we see, we don't have an opinion. A lot of people attend to, for example, the quality and the texture of for example, in regards to their hygiene, like there's people clean the skin, but how many people think about their bones throughout the day? How many people think about like the mass that is on the bones of their legs, for example? How many people think about structures that are not just on the surface? Now, Western thought I cannot avoid because we have, when I say Western thought, I mean it's not just Western. I mean the Eastern, the Western Enlightenment takes us to an external consequence being our liberation, and the Eastern Enlightenment takes us into an internal consequence being our liberation. It's like imagine somebody saw reality and they asked it, where did reality come from? And the person realized that consciousness appears to itself as if it's present in thin air. I'm going to consider for a moment that if there was a pilot's academy and advanced human beings were to share with one another methods and approaches of how to navigate not just the body in the world, but the attention within the embodiment of the world, which is being the body. So for me, it's sometimes strange. The concept of a self fades. It's kind of like when you blink, there is no self. When your eyes are open, the self is there. And so this kind coming into focus and the blurring of this notion of self sometimes have made me feel as if I'm a relationship of the world with emptiness. That means the concept of the self is sandwiched between uh, zero and infinity. And so we find freedom as the spectrum is given access to. It's kind of cool. We're creatures that define our boundaries, then evolve through them. And that's really the great transition of our evolution, the subjective evolution, was when man became mankind behind his eyes. What humanity needs is humanhood, and to first honor humanhood, which means we got to slow down our technologies, external technologies that may alter the human experience. That means that's a good way of actually classifying technologies on the potential influence and states of mind they may push people in. You know, there was something unique about Friedrich Nietzsche that when he was writing on pen in hand on paper, his writing had a sort of freedom to it. But when he was writing on the typewriter when he got sick in his later years, when he was writing on the typewriter, it became a situation where his writing became cold and machine like. It's as if this dude was writing in a factory where every letter he would press was like a gear of the factory moving, machinery in the factory moving. Of course, Charles Bukowski is like a really badass writer. You know, he says like he would write some days where he was writing on a typewriter and he was writing so fast it sounded like a machine gun. You know? It is true, certain percentage of life is given, like a math exam. The equation is given, the problem is given. And certain percentage of it, it's an unknown variable where the solution is required. And I have discovered that the solution to all problems in life is the engagement of the direct attention with all that it is considering indirect. So what appears is that the person who probably thinks that they're a thought, or let me say it like this, the person who thinks that they're a thought, you can say it's another way of them having a box on their head. And so when the box is on the person's head, it's true. All they experience is nothing, you know? But when the box moves above our heads, what that means is we have become conscious of how we were self inhibiting our own intelligence. And when that comes into administration, freedom flows as novelty. Like, tell me anyone who's experienced a moment of freedom without acknowledging the new. It's like without time, how could you have freedom? How could any verb exist without change? So, really, I find that really when I speak to audiences in these talks, I am on one level commenting on the subjective uh, the subjective processes of our being, and certain processes that, regardless of our subjects on the object is what it is. You know, there's some people in this life where I've interpreted the person in one way. Then I've gotten to know the person better. I've interpreted them in another way. Then the person has done certain things where I'm like, holy shit, this is this person. What am I trying to do here? Trying to it's like be the chosen one to see their greatest self spontaneously in that moment. So the situation is one of those things that I say this often because I wrote it in one of my poems, and I'm kind of proud of it, you know. The sentence had such nice architecture. It was like, many faces face the earth, and the earth faces many faces. So in other words, there are as much as there are people, there are, you can say, currently as I'm speaking, endless interpretations of the moment occurring through various unique genetical patterns of each individual being. That means you are a unique data processor of humanity. And Mr. Within is saying, why just live in the bubbles of your inner realms when there is so much the world can engage? Now, I've noticed something. Culture is a crucial factor. There are certain doors that if culture doesn't open it up for you, I don't know how the social fabric can move towards a collective vision. That means everything is necessary to consider if it is here. And sometimes when the person really looks at what is here, they find a moment pre-thought, before there ever was a concept of a thought, before the world was divided into landscapes, and before infinity had separated from the void. There's a nice quote by Carl Jung that goes something like, he who looks outside dreams, he who looks within awakens. And pretty much I've declared any sentence that has the word within in it, I'm going to be like, all right, I'll let this sentence go through my acknowledgement. But the issue is that if man can, let's say, have the right kind of effort that's an advanced civilization requires, how ready is the world to receive man? So in some sense the question arises where the person's like, all right, we cannot avoid, it's like, I'm telling you, if you're a human being, you cannot avoid your civilization, and if you do, it's foolishness. It's like man's civilization now is not something he's proud of. That means, imagine all those human beings, how sad, all those human beings being born and looking at life, and rather than realizing every person in history has had a different kind of view on life, that means there is a choice in what you tune into out of the moment. So there are sometimes my mind does see criticism. It's like, when I feel there's no way a person can like someone if there's nothing about them that they can dislike. It's like the concept of like and dislike comes together. And so there are oftentimes it can be said that what you dislike in others is actually what you're not willing to confront in yourself. That means it's sometimes harder to put our demons in others than to kind of dismantle, extinguish these unconscious flames within. You know. So this is why you can always say that it's not that we are souls, but our eyes are much more deeper than our conceptual linguistic reality can grasp. So what that means is knowledge is hovering in emptiness. I have said, when the educational system realizes this, there's going to be a strange apocalyptic moment where the students are going to become the teachers, because the educational system requires new information. And that new information can only occur in the past and the future, infusing as new possibilities in the mind of now. And of course, I'm one person speaking, guys. There's no way the system is too big for me to see all angles of it to give a complete judgment and ultimate resolution. I'm not speak. If you hear my talks, I say, like, listen to me playfully. Realize how a lot of your own experiences kind of shape the voice of others for you. For me, it's just there's this cool fascination. 8 billion creatures on this rock, and there are worlds behind their eyes that are remain hidden until the person chooses to speak, chooses to engage, chooses to care for the world in front of their eyes as much as the world behind their eyes. Because you don't care for the world in front of your eyes if you're only there. That means it's so easy to bunker down in a belief. It's so easy to just accept a portrait as truth, but in reality, I find we have a sense of as human beings. It's like we're kind of acquainted with the notion that knowledge is static. When you even see how educational systems function, pretty much it's like they show you a photograph in class, and you got to remember it at the end of the term. Do you know what I mean? So on some level, it's just image orientation, or symbol attribution to phenomenology. But on another level, it's like, does it make sense? We are 8 billion unique beings with unique kind of strands of DNA, and we all have to fit into one sort of educational judgment of value, one sort of system. So it doesn't make sense. So immediately you can just see that the civilization is not advanced. Because if it was advanced, there would be a greater potential to get the result. you know so you got to understand, philosophy is like pulling the brakes. Philosophers, really, their purpose in life is when things are getting too extreme to come and just be like, yo, what about the other side? What about this? What about this? Is how a philosopher can save the world, by coming and telling people, yo, 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 chill, chill, chill. What kind of world are you seeing? Philosophers are astronauts of the inner realms. There we go. I said it. Of the subjective realm. Yeah. So what that means is, if the system of intelligence, education, gets defined by dynamic revelation rather than static regurgitation, like, how incredible would it be? How incredible would it be that it's as if, I think, we um, we conquer one of humanity's greatest challenges: how to update itself without breaking itself. That means it's like, in that time where the two different groups were fighting against one another, they realized, holy shit, if we worked together, we could have had so much more. And so that's what I'm realizing. I'm realizing life is like, you are climbing out of your inner realms in your youth, which are so conditionally kept based on how you were introduced to life and the waves of information hit you on a daily basis. And then you see, eventually you get to a point where I find it that's when a person becomes truly an actualized person, when they have stepped out of their self for the first time, stepped out of this Iron Man suit of archetypal, belief oriented, language oriented disposition. So it's like, how you start off as a creature in this life is as important as how you will interpret the end. Really, guys, it's a multidimensional system, which means the effort of one dimension is not enough. which ultimately means each dimension has to become aware of its position in the collective. That means you have to find a new way of valuing how the concept of a human being has meaning for you if you want to behave differently. Like Albert Einstein tells us this, you cannot solve a problem from the same level of consciousness that created it. So you cannot advance a civilization from the same way the members of the civilization are acting in it. So when we wonder about how do we change it, well, obviously we cannot control people's individual freedoms. Right? We cannot kind of be like, yo, this is the only way you should behave. This is efficiency, da da da. Like we don't want to create like kind of fascist streams of paradise. I'm saying like it's per se more like human beings rather than having an instruction, having an ideological command direct them. They for look in the mirror, and as they look in the mirror they come into terms of what is actually here. And when you can look at what's actually here anew, it's kind of like how Moria Shiva says, create each day anew. So you kind of suddenly see that the potentials are different. And you can examine this. This is the cool thing about life. You know how they say when you're having fun, time flies. It's not that time flies. Time doesn't exist there. Time is not an airplane. It cannot fly. Like it's not a bird. You know, it's not Superman. Time is a projection. It is a source of a subjective sensitivity imprinted upon the objective phenomena. You can say time is how one word is encapsulating our conclusion of objectivity. A conqueror named Time. That was something, a novel I was working on. A cosmic road. Eyes that walk in the cosmos. Alan Watts had this interesting concept where he's like, just like how apples just started growing, it's like, something appled, it's like suddenly it peopled and the notion of the person emerged, and that's what we're left with now. And it's as if the demand for people to be able to observe beyond their personal truths has become more than ever, because the complexity and the technologies we have require more clear actual confrontation of what is happening than what we want to happen. Or I don't know how to say it. It's like you gotta it's like, imagine you have a pet and this pet is sick. So you're looking at the system and you're like, okay, how do I help? How do I? What's the solution? What's the solution? And you find a solution and you take it to the vet, for example. You know. And so when you take this creature to the vet, you begin to see that there are certain levels of life being animate that simply the person cannot interpret. There are certain blind spots in the in an ideological sense in your inner realms. So these blind spots, if you don't move in the subjective realms consciously, will not be revealed. So what that means is, think about me saying this sentence. Now I'm vocalizing the sentence. I'm saying this. But before I say it, what is actually occurring is literally, it's as if like my eyes are looking in the air above me and it's like a thought is there. So what I'm not literally, I mean like it feels across as if there is an observable subjective phenomena occurring. And it's that observable factor of having a relationship with knowledge, which is not just a relationship with words, but it is a relationship with the images behind the words. That's when things really become memorable, when they connect to the real. And when you realize the real is dynamic, everything becomes your connection. It's the navigation. It's like the pilot is the whole airplane in that moment when he navigates it. So, anyways, guys, um, thanks for tuning in. I feel I will end it off here. I may be back later for another talk, but I think it is now time for humanity to consciously navigate beyond the objective realm, subjective realm, into a recognition of the presence of the witness. The presence of the witness will liberate mankind into a nullification point where, regardless of what narrative we have, we are aware of the emptiness that it arose. So, emptiness becomes a resolution to the complexity of any sort of value system in what is full or shaped. So, what that means is you realize that life is shapes moving and changing, and as these shapes are moving and changing, the awareness to these shapes is appearing unchanging and unmoving. This doesn't mean that the mind is not living a hidden life. It means um, uh, it means when an iceberg melts into the ocean, it is the ocean. The resolution to the whole in the search for enlightenment was an experiential witnessing. And in that experiential witnessing, the certainty recalibrated in how you knew what was known and unknown in that moment. So pretty much learn as much as you learn from things you know. Also learn from things you don't know. The unknown is strangely a divine blessing, but we have been raised and conditioned as a civilization to fear it. We have been literally, it's just the psychology of a temporary creature. Like, we freak out if we're uncertain, if we don't know what's going to happen. When we don't know what's going to happen, what do? We check what we have, so self-defense arises. So it's kind of like, strangely, it's like, for example, in chess they say the best defense is offense. It's like that moment when your king is kind of um, being ganged up on. What do? You send what you attack the king of the opponent. So in all that time that you are attacking the king, when the other person has to be on defense, you're wondering about it. It's giving you time. Do you know? So it's kind of like you defend yourself by attacking first. Do you know this kind of mentality? Um, opposite can also apply, that in some sense a person is defensive because they feel that's the best way. It's like when you love someone, defense is the best offense. you know so when you get upset or something occurs, it's like in that situation it's a reverse, because you realize the maintenance when you realize your mind is being your whole moment. I think instantaneously you will become a compassionate natured being. Just you will just be your simple decent self. It's like you'll be a self before the word self. You'll be a self that was never a self. So anyways, guys, thanks for tuning in. And if we think the world outside is an illusion, then perhaps the clarity is within. Blessings.